Another piece of this that I think we haven't touched on when we're looking at cost, when we're looking at bringing in humans to this, instead of going, let's take it the other direction of if you do have a human who is going in and doing all of these processes. In current events right now, we are hearing all about, you hear about labor shortages, you hear about tariffs, all of these things. Not to take no political angle on it, it's just in the news. That's what's going on right now. There's things that our manufacturers are thinking about as they make decisions right now, and they always have. But looking at that, what does it look like when you have a situation where, say, an engineer is doing that data entry, or you do have someone and you're trying to entice someone to be a part of your company, but you feel like you're still stuck in these manual processes? What does that do to your ability to retain good talent?
I think it makes it very difficult. I know, especially in a world where like people are up and coming and they're coming out of college and they have all these tools available to them and they're used to like doing the part that humans are really good at doing, which is the creative process of any given thing, of the inception of the idea. I mean, you think about like AI today, it only can regurgitate what's already been done, right? It just does it faster and remembers everything. Okay. But it doesn't necessarily create new things, at least not yet. Yeah, he's not here until 2026. Like humans are really, really good at that, like coming up with a new design, creative way to do something, that twist. And that's the part engineers sign up for. That's what I signed up for. I'm an engineer. That's the cool stuff. Like, and then and you think about the panacea or the dream is that I can, and what's the definition of power? I think it, therefore it becomes, right? That's we've been closer to that than ever in our lifetime.
Absolutely.
All right. And so to me, it's like anything that like adds friction to that kind of power will feel slow. It will not feel attractive to you. And so those who adopt the tools that enable that will get the best people.
Yeah. It's, I think you're absolutely right with doing the things that you feel like you want to do. It's going to keep that passion there and you're going to be just more productive. You just are. There's no two ways about it. I think the other piece of that, going back to sometimes the concerns I think that come up of, we talked a little bit about earlier of, well, why would I not invest in this if, the ERP, we're making this big investment in this ERP, it feels like an added risk. I think is what we hear a lot from folks when we're having conversations. Well, I don't know if I want to change my process even more. I don't know if I want to do this, and continue to do this. What it ends up, though, I feel like doing, and what CADTALK ends up doing, is creating this ability. I think there's this misconception that there is a loss of control when you are trying to change these processes or you're trying to mitigate cost. It's almost like you're giving up control of this, but really it's turning into a managing by exception type of situation in most cases. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think it does two things. Like you're right. It's people are like, they kind of call it lack of control because it's really lack of definition. They don't know what it actually needs to be. They haven't defined what they want well enough to therefore they base it in, they call it lack of control because it's actually lack of understanding. It's actually lack of clarity. Okay. So it's like, with the exercise, by going through that process, is that you're getting clarity in what you actually want. And most of the time the clarity is pretty, like, kind of what you want most of the time. You want the outcome to look like. I want this thing to look like this and have under these conditions, do these things. And you have to like go through that exercise of defining that and saying this is, and then what happens is that hasn't been clearly defined. And you have this like, you have Jim and, building B who just kind of makes it work and it doesn't cause any issues. And we don't really know what that black box of what Jim is figuring out. He just knows because he's been here forever. Right. And he's making all those decisions and there hasn't been clarity around like why it needs to work that way, why we did code it that way, or any of that stuff, right? And then we use the excuse of all this variability as the reason why we can't. But there really isn't that much variability. It's just unclear. And then, so the managed by exception would come up when there is unclarity, but we just kind of, because it's hard to define what it is to get the clarity, we just say, oh, it's too variable, therefore we need control.
This goes into, I think, something that there is and this is, again, all of my background. If you're listening to this, you probably have no idea what my background is, but I used to work in sports broadcasting and used to work in sports quite a bit. So I have this background that I fall back on. And what I would see all the time is when a game would come up on the schedule, there would be this kind of idea of, okay, well, the game is approaching and we're preparing, we're going to be marketing this. What are we doing this week in advance to do this? Or, oh, something came up during the game. How are we going to solve this during the game? And it always frustrated me to no end because it felt like that there was this misconception that there were so many variables that were going on. And instead I was like, why can't we get ahead of this? Why can't we reduce the number of variables that we're having to deal with? There's not as much variability as you think there is if you plan ahead, if you make those decisions, and if you have systems in place to do that. I think sometimes in as humans, I think this is getting existential a little bit, but I feel like in our own misconception of our own importance, we
Mhm.
tend to think that only we can solve this, or only I can do this, or when something goes wrong, we have to be the one to fix it. It almost just puts more pressure on yourself than you have to be.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, that's actually, I think it does. I mean, that's and we draw meaning from it. Like that's the other thing
Mm,
that's up too. It's like, well, if I'm not fixing the problems, then like what use am I, right? It's like kind of
right.
that goes into that kind of thing where it's like, and actually that is actually, it's not a bad use of people at all. I mean, if you think
Mm,
like if you are managing the exceptions, just don't go into the illusion that everything's an exception.
right.
And
Right.
that's the part that and yeah, that's the part we have to be careful of because it's just not. And it's usually lack of clarity, not an increase in variability, but a lack of clarity.
Right. Exactly. Well, you probably didn't expect to hear that on a podcast about manufacturing today, but
Yeah.
that's what we love to be able to talk about those kinds of things. We've talked a little bit about the problem, what it costs. We kind of walk through that. Let's shift to what the path forward looks like. Because I know the first thing that a lot of people are going to think when they hear this, if they are evaluating a solution, CAD Talk or otherwise, like this, when they're thinking about their ERP, whatever that is, they're going to think, great, another system I have to buy and I have to implement. And that's not really what this is. So if someone is listening to this, they're nodding along, they recognize that this is their situation, where do they start? If you're going to be looking at that path forward and not just like path forward doesn't start with like making a demo call to CAD Talk right away. This is not a
Mhm.
sales pitch. That's not the point.
Yeah.
What does that first step actually look like if you're looking to make your ERP investment pay off?
Yeah. I think it's being very clear. Once again, this goes back to clarity, right? So being very clear about like, what's the outcome that you want from that purchase? So if you are the thing that you've already bought, right? What's the clear outcome you want? And I'm sure it's going to be different depending on which department you ask and who made the decision and all these types of things. And you have to look, then you have to take like a step back, 1 degree or 2 degrees and say, what would have to be true for that to work? And then what assumptions have you made that like that are either hidden or not hidden of like what would take that to happen and how much work is that? Right. And then that's the part that people don't really clearly know. They don't know what that is. And that's kind of the part that we try to help is those, it's like how do we make those bits more likely to happen so you get that benefit. And so yeah, I think you should be really clear about like what is the thing that you bought this thing for. Like remember. And then you probably have to do a priority list of what things matter the most and which things would you actually give up if you had to. Once again, you can't do everything at once. So it's like I've seen many ERP implementation where the guy wanted really pretty accounting reports and we couldn't give up the accounting reports, but all the data in the accounting reports were wrong, right? Like because they could, and then or they wanted to do something like finite scheduling. So finite scheduling, very common thing people want in manufacturing, very rarely ever implemented. Lots of ERP systems been bought because of really fancy finite scheduling. And this is getting a little technical, but hopefully the audience will follow on this if they're manufacturers. It's like finite scheduling is like the ability to schedule finite, which is like really taking the capacity of machines and people and all these things to figure out how you're going to make something and actually predict the dates really well. The only way you do that is you have clean bills of material with good routings and good runtimes. It's the only way that works. That's hard. So most people they buy it for finite scheduling. They do all the work, and then they go, "Oh, this is hard. Let's do infinite now." And they settle, and then they've lost the reason they bought it the first time for the first
Mm,
place. So there's like all these things that happen along the way. There's